I always thought moving to Salem was going to be a fresh start, a way to escape the noise of my past. The old house on Chestnut Street, with its creaking floors and centuries-old architecture, seemed like the perfect place to disappear for a while, to lose myself in something quieter. Salem had its charm, a town draped in the shadows of its history, but that allure quickly turned sinister the day I found the book. It was tucked away in the attic, a dusty old leather-bound thing, hidden behind piles of forgotten furniture. The house had been abandoned for years before I moved in, so the attic had never been touched. I wasn't looking for anything, just storing some boxes when I noticed the faint glimmer of a chain draped over the corner of a weathered trunk. Curiosity got the better of me and I pulled it out. That was when I saw the book. Its cover was worn but had intricate symbols carved into the leather, symbols I couldn't recognize. It felt wrong in my hands, too cold, as though the very air around it had been sucked out. But the worst part was when I opened it. The first few pages were blank, save for one word scratched in red ink on the first page, hallowed. My throat tightened, and something in the room shifted like a cold breeze that never came. I should have left it there. I should have burned the damn thing, but I didn't. Halloween came just a few days later, and the whole town was buzzing with festivities. Children trick-or-treated down the narrow streets, their laughter echoing in the distance. Inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The house groaned louder than usual, the shadows longer. The book seemed to hum from the attic, pulling at my mind, begging me to look at it again. That night, I finally gave in. Up in the attic, the floorboards creaked beneath my feet as I stood in front of the trunk again. I reached for the book. My hands trembled as I opened it to the same page. But this time it wasn't blank. The red ink had spread across the pages, forming strange symbols, patterns that seemed to move if I looked at them too long. My vision blurred and a searing pain stabbed behind my eyes. I closed the book and stepped back, but the room felt smaller, tighter, suffocating. Then I heard it, a whisper. It came from nowhere and everywhere all at once, like voices from the walls themselves. The sound grew louder until it became a chorus of murmurs, low and unintelligible. My heart pounded against my ribs as I stumbled back toward the stairs. But I wasn't fast enough. From the corner of the attic, something moved. At first I thought it was just the shadows playing tricks on me. But then I saw it clearly, a figure, hunched and distorted, its pale skin stretched tight over brittle bones. It stood in the far corner, facing away from me, its head twitching unnaturally. I froze. My mouth went dry. I couldn't scream, couldn't move. The thing's head snapped toward me with a sickening crack. Two hollow black eyes bore into mine, and a smile, twisted and jagged, spread across its face. My legs finally found the strength to move, and I bolted for the stairs. But the whispers followed me, rising in intensity. I reached the bottom of the stairs and slammed the attic door shut. My chest heaved as I locked it, pressing my back against the wood, as if that alone could keep whatever was up there from getting out. The air was thick with the scent of burning wax and something else, decay. Then the lights went out. The house plunged into complete darkness, and the whispers returned, louder now, almost chanting. My pulse hammered in my ears as I fumbled for my phone. But as soon as I turned on the flashlight, I wished I hadn't. In the beam of light, standing at the foot of the attic stairs, was another figure. This one taller, draped in what looked like a rotting cloak, its hands long and bony. It didn't move. It just stood there, watching. The floor creaked behind me. I spun around just in time to see another figure crawling toward me from the shadows. Its limbs unnaturally long, its face twisted and hollow like the others, barely visible in the dim light. I stumbled backward, crashing into a table, sending an old lamp to the floor with a deafening crash. My mind screamed to run, to get out of the house, but no matter which way I turned, there they were. Crawling out from under furniture, stepping through doorways, emerging from the very walls. Their hollow eyes fixed on me, their twisted smiles growing wider. They were everywhere. I backed into the corner of the room, trapped. The whispers turned into a cacophony of voices, words I couldn't understand but could feel deep inside, clawing at my sanity. Then a hand, cold and skeletal, gripped my ankle. My breath caught in my throat as I looked down. The hand was skeletal, its fingers long and thin like brittle twigs, but it had a crushing strength. I kicked hard, trying to free myself, but the grip only tightened. A sharp pain shot up my leg, and for a second I thought it might snap my bone like a twig. The thing crawled toward me, pulling itself closer with each lurch. Its face was just as hollow as the others, empty eye sockets staring into me as if it could see more than just flesh. As it reached for me with its other hand, I let out a scream that I couldn't hold back any longer. My body moved before my mind caught up, and I swung the fallen lamp down hard on its arm. The crunching sound it made didn't seem real, but the hand let go. I scrambled to my feet, my ankle throbbing, and stumbled toward the front door. I could hear them behind me, the whispering voices turning into hisses, their nails scraping across the wooden floors. I wasn't thinking clearly, just running. The hallway felt impossibly long, like the house had stretched, trapping me in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Every step I took echoed like the walls were mocking me. I reached the front door and fumbled with the lock, my hands trembling so badly that I almost couldn't turn the knob. As I yanked the door open, a gust of icy wind hit me like a slap. I paused just for a second and looked outside. The street was empty, too empty. No children, no laughter, no one. The houses that were once lit with Halloween decorations stood dark, lifeless. The entire town had gone silent. Even the air felt thick with something wrong. I took one shaky step outside, but the whispers followed, swirling around me in the wind. I turned back to the house, and that's when I saw it. The figures were no longer just inside the house. They were standing on the porch in the doorway, lining the windows. Dozens of them, their hollow eyes locked onto mine. I could see their faces now, women, all of them, their mouths twisted into unnatural smiles, their eyes sunken deep into their skulls. Some wore tattered dresses that looked like they belonged in another century, others were little more than shadowy outlines. But the worst part, they were waiting. It was as if they were letting me run, letting me think I had a chance. A sick game, and I was the prize. Suddenly one of the figures, taller than the rest, wearing what looked like a hooded cloak, stepped forward out of the shadows. Her face was pale, so pale it almost seemed to glow. She raised one hand, long fingers extending toward me, and whispered something I couldn't understand. The words weren't English, but they burned in my ears like fire. I turned and ran, bolting down the street as fast as my legs could carry me. The wind whipped around me, howling through the empty streets. My feet pounded against the pavement, and my heart felt like it might explode from my chest. But no matter how fast I ran, I could still hear the whispers, always just behind me. When I reached the edge of town, I collapsed on the cold ground, gasping for air. My body ached, every nerve on fire. I looked back, expecting to see them following me, but there was nothing. Only silence. For a moment, I thought it was over, that maybe I had escaped. Maybe the curse of that damn book had some limit, something that kept them bound to the house. But deep down, I knew better. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone, the screen flickering with low battery. I needed help. I needed someone to tell me what to do. But there was no signal. The wind died and the silence was deafening. Then in the distance, I saw them again. At first, just shapes in the dark, but as they drew closer, I saw their faces, those same twisted, hollow-eyed faces. They weren't bound to the house. They weren't bound to anything. And they were coming. I scrambled to my feet, my legs screaming in protest, and ran into the woods that bordered the town. The branches tore at my clothes and scratched my skin, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away, to hide. I could still hear them behind me. Their footsteps were soft, but they were there, always there, just beyond the trees, just beyond sight. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, I saw them. Closer, closer. I don't know how long I ran or how far, but eventually I reached a small clearing, the moonlight barely breaking through the thick canopy above. My chest burned with each breath, and my legs felt like they might give out at any second. That's when I saw it. In the center of the clearing stood a single tree, gnarled and ancient, and at its base, another book. It was identical to the one in my attic. The same symbols, the same worn leather cover, as if it had been waiting for me all along. I didn't want to touch it, but I had no choice. My hands shook as I picked it up, and as soon as my fingers brushed the cover, the whispers stopped. The forest was silent again. But in that silence, I heard something else, a low, raspy breath. Not behind me, not in the trees, right next to me. Slowly, I turned my head, and there, standing beside the tree, was one of the women. Her face was inches from mine, her mouth twisted into that horrible, hollow smile. Her eyes, those black, empty voids, stared into me, through me. Then she leaned in and whispered one word. "Run!" I froze. The word hung in the air like a threat, her breath cold and rancid against my skin. My mind screamed at me to move, to get away from her, but my body refused to listen. I stood there, paralyzed by the horror of it all. The pale face, the twisted smile, the black voids where eyes should have been. Her word echoed inside my head, "Run," as if it had lodged itself deep in my mind. Suddenly the figure moved, but not in any way a human should. It was like she shifted, not step by step, but instantaneously, blinking from one spot to another, her hollow face still locked on mine. Each time she appeared, she was closer. Too close. My heart pounded in my chest, my muscles tensed as if a dam was about to break. Then without thinking, I dropped the book and bolted into the forest. Branches whipped at my face, but I barely felt them. My body was in overdrive, every instinct screaming for survival. The cold air burned my lungs, and I could hear my own frantic breathing echo in the stillness. But the forest wasn't still. No matter how fast I ran, no matter how far I went, I could feel them behind me. They weren't chasing in the normal sense, there were no footsteps. They moved differently, like shadows, always just on the edge of my vision. I didn't dare look back again. My legs were heavy, and my lungs felt like they might explode. The ground was uneven, treacherous, but I kept going. The further I ran, the more the forest seemed to twist around me. The trees began to change, their branches gnarled like skeletal fingers reaching toward me. I stumbled and fell, crashing to the ground, but I forced myself up, wiping the blood from a fresh cut on my arm. Then I heard it. The sound of something behind me, impossibly close. A low, guttural growl, not from a human voice, but something darker, more primal. It was inhuman. I pushed forward, my legs burning, but the sound grew louder, closing the distance. I couldn't escape it. I couldn't escape them. It felt like they were inside me, like their presence was gnawing at the edges of my sanity. Up ahead, the trees thinned, and I could see the faint glow of the town's lights. A surge of hope flickered inside me. If I could just make it back, if I could find someone, maybe, just maybe, I could escape this nightmare. But then I felt it, a cold hand gripping my shoulder. I screamed and spun around, but no one was there. Just the trees, just the darkness. My heart pounded against my ribs, the terror suffocating me. But when I turned back toward the town, the clearing that had been there was gone. In its place, a wall of thick, gnarled trees blocked my path. I was trapped. The air grew colder, the darkness pressing in on me like a living thing. I turned around again, and that's when I saw them, standing in a circle surrounding me, their hollow eyes watching with cruel anticipation. There were so many of them now, their forms flickering in and out of the shadows, their smiles twisted into grotesque grins. I stumbled backward, my legs giving out as I fell to the ground. The whispers started again, louder this time, almost chanting. The figures moved closer, their twisted limbs and hollow faces illuminated by the faint moonlight. I could feel their presence, the cold radiating off of them like death itself. And then I saw her, the one who had whispered to me. She stood in the center of the circle, her hooded cloak flowing in a wind that didn't exist. Her face was pale, her lips stretched into a smile too wide, too unnatural. She raised her hand slowly, pointing at me with those long, bony fingers. "You released us," her voice rasped in my mind, not spoken but felt. "Now we claim what was promised." I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. I didn't know what she meant. I didn't understand any of this. I just wanted it to stop. I just wanted to wake up. She stepped forward, the others parting to let her through, and as she moved closer, I realized something. There was something familiar about her, about all of them. The hollow faces, the twisted smiles, I had seen them before. In the book. Their faces had been drawn on the pages, etched into the cursed leather like warnings I had ignored. I scrambled backward, desperate to escape, but my back hit the trunk of a tree. There was nowhere to go. The woman knelt before me, her face inches from mine, her eyes, empty, black pits, boring into my soul. She reached out, her cold fingers grazing my cheek, and I shuddered at the icy touch. "You cannot run," she whispered, her voice like the rustling of dead leaves. "You cannot hide." And then, with a single sharp movement, she grabbed my wrist. The pain was instant, searing, as if her touch was burning through my skin, down to the bone. I screamed, but no sound came out. The world around me spun, the trees melting into a blur as my vision darkened. The last thing I saw before everything went black was her smile, wide and jagged like the grin of something inhuman. When I woke, I was no longer in the forest. I was back in the attic. The book lay open beside me, its pages fluttering in a breeze I couldn't feel. The symbols were glowing now, pulsing with a sick red light. I tried to move, but my body wouldn't respond. It was like something was holding me down, like invisible hands were pinning me to the floor. And then I heard the whispers again. This time they weren't coming from the book. They were coming from inside me. The floor beneath me creaked, and slowly I managed to turn my head. My blood ran cold. Standing in the doorway was the same figure, the hooded woman, her hollow eyes fixed on mine. But she wasn't alone. Behind her, stepping out from the shadows, was another figure. And this one was me. She smiled, the same twisted, hollow smile as the others, and took a step forward. As the figure that looked like me stepped forward, I felt a cold wave of dread settle over me, paralyzing my thoughts. It was me, but it wasn't. Its eyes were hollow, its skin stretched too tightly over its face, and its smile, twisted, inhuman, mirrored the others. My heart raced, my mind screamed for a way out, but all I could do was stare as it came closer. The whispers grew louder, clawing at my mind, threatening to tear me apart from the inside. The hooded woman behind the figure stood still, watching with cruel delight. I could feel the weight of their presence bearing down on me, suffocating. It felt like this was the end, that there was no escape. But then something shifted. A breeze, gentle and warm, swept through the attic. The symbols on the book stopped glowing, their sickly red light fading into nothingness. The whispers faltered, as if something was interrupting them. The figure that looked like me paused, its head snapping up as if it sensed something was wrong. I took a shaky breath, feeling control return to my body. The invisible hands that had been holding me down loosened their grip, and for the first time in what felt like hours, I was able to move. That's when I heard it, a soft voice, faint but clear, cutting through the darkness. "You have the power to stop this." The voice didn't come from the witches, or from the whispers. It came from somewhere deep inside me, a part of me that had been buried beneath the fear and the terror. I didn't understand what it meant, but something inside me did. I stood up, my legs shaking, and faced the figure that wore my face. It took another step toward me, its hollow eyes locking onto mine. The hooded woman behind it began to whisper again, her voice low and menacing, but this time the words didn't seem to have the same power over me. "I am not afraid of you," I said, the words surprising even myself. My voice was weak, trembling, but it grew stronger with each word. "You don't control me." The figure stopped, its smile faltering. The whispers around me began to fade, the oppressive weight in the room lifting. The hooded woman hissed, stepping forward as if to stop me, but I stood my ground. "I didn't unleash you," I continued, my voice steady now. "You've been here all along, feeding on fear, on the past, but you can't have me." The air in the attic seemed to vibrate with tension, the witch's hollow eyes widening as if they were beginning to realize something. The book at my feet began to shake, the pages fluttering wildly as though it was resisting the very words I spoke. "I release you," I said, feeling a surge of warmth in my chest. "You don't belong here anymore." A gust of wind blasted through the attic, sending dust and debris swirling around the room. The hooded woman screamed, her voice high-pitched and inhuman as the other figures began to dissolve into the air. Their forms shimmered, losing their shape, until they were nothing more than wisps of smoke, vanishing into the night. The figure that looked like me was the last to go. It reached out, its hand trembling as it tried to touch me, but I stood firm. With one final breath, it collapsed into itself, disappearing into thin air. And then there was silence. I stood there, the attic empty now except for me and the book. The oppressive weight, the cold presence of the witches, gone. The house felt different, lighter, as if a dark shadow had finally been lifted. I looked down at the book, its pages now blank, the symbols gone. Carefully I closed it, feeling a strange sense of peace wash over me. Whatever had been released was no longer here. The curse was broken. As I walked out of the attic, down the creaky old stairs, I glanced back once, half expecting to see those twisted faces in the shadows. But there was nothing. The house was just a house again, quiet and still. Outside, the night sky was clear, the town of Salem calm as the last of the Halloween festivities wound down. I stepped onto the porch, breathing in the cool air, feeling the weight of the past few hours fall away from my shoulders. I survived. As I stood there, watching the faint glow of the town lights, I realized something important. The witches, the curse, they had been real, but so was my strength. They had tried to use fear to claim me, to break me, but in the end, I had broken free. A smile crept across my face. Maybe coming to Salem was the fresh start I needed after all. The past couldn't hurt me anymore. And as I closed the door behind me, I knew that this house, this home, was truly mine now. Whatever darkness had once haunted it was gone, banished back to the shadows where it belonged. And I wasn't afraid anymore.